Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy. Today's episode we are going to install the Holley Super Sniper EFI on the Fairmont. Let's get started. And I got my Holley Super Sniper EFI from Summit Racing. Step 1, remove the engine and transmission. No, you don't need to remove the engine and transmission. I took the engine and transmission out because in addition to installing the Holley Super Sniper EFI, I also had some lifter issues and I had to replace those, but the lifters I had in there required the removal of the cylinder heads to get to them, hence the reason the engine came out. But it's all back together, ready to go back in, and I have things set up for the wiring of the Super Sniper EFI, which we'll start with over on the wiring diagram, and then I'll show you what I'm doing on the car. Here is the basic wiring setup for the Sniper EFI. It has many capabilities, many inputs and outputs that are programmable. Those are going to be specific to your application. My installation is only going to be the bare minimum in order to make this thing run. I'm not going to hook up any fuel pump relays or anything like that. I already have that hooked up in my vehicle. The things that I have hooked up now are a power and ground going to the battery. This is extremely important. I mention this a lot in the notes of the instructions, but you need to take your power and ground directly on the battery. The other thing you'll need is a switched ignition hot. So in other words, as you crank the engine, you need to have a power source that goes to this that stays hot during crank. As far as coil hookup, that's going to depend on your setup, whether or not you have an ignition coil like this or a CD box like I have. I'm doing the CD box wiring, and I'm only going to be using this purple wire, which is already connected in the vehicle. It needs a TAC input, which I have ready to wire up, and this is the TAC output on this wiring harness. As I said, you can control many different things with this, but the one output I'm concerned about in this harness is just this brown wire for the TAC output for my dash. I'll put a link in the description to the full instructions for this so you can look all this over and figure it out how to make it work in your application. This 7-pin connector is the main harness going into the vehicle, so this is the one you need the most. This is the one that has power and ground. The pink is going to be the switched ignition hot, and the green and the purple here go into a special connector that just chokes down into this purple connector that's going to go into the TAC output of my CD box in the back there. So this is the main harness, so to speak, and I have this passing through the firewall up under the dash that I'll show you in a second. The 10-pin harness has many of the controllable inputs and outputs on it, but the only one I'm concerned with is the TAC output, and that I'll show you how I'm wiring that up inside. But all this other stuff I'm really just going to tie off for now, because eventually I would like to set this up so that I can have cooling fan control, but my cooling fan controls are set up perfectly now, and I'm just going to leave them alone just so I can get this thing in and running. Something I forgot to share with you is that I had already run the cable for this display and communication between the ECU on the Sniper EFI and the engine through the same location that I ran all the other wires. So this was also through there, and there's something else I want to show you with this as well. So in addition to being able to plug in the interface that's up on the dash, they also supplied this cable, which has this USB connection, and I suspect that's so you can hook it up to a laptop, maybe do diagnostics, or maybe put other tunes in it. I'm really not sure, but just know that this can plug into that same terminal that goes to the ECU on top of the engine. Okay, on the other side of the firewall, up under my dash, I've got the main power and ground that are here. I've got the pink ignition switch, ignition hot source or crank hot. This is the purple wire that is going to be the TAC input to the computer, and this brown wire is going to be the TAC output to my dash. So I need to connect up all of these with what I have in the vehicle. I've modified the harness that came with a Super Sniper EFI. As stated, I already have a fuel pump relay wired up, hooked up the way I like it. I'm going to leave that as is. But the unit still needs to be powered up via the same harness, and they have this 30 amp inline fuse that I'm going to employ. The wires that I will show you in a moment, this is the power and ground coming back to the battery, which I'm going to connect, and I'm going to connect the power through this fuse right here. So we'll go through this in case there's ever an issue. It will pop this fuse. These wires lead up through behind the back seat to, let me show you. So over here on the floor, I have the power and ground wires that I'm going to run over the transmission hump there. I also have purple wire for the TAC input and the brown wire for the TAC output ready to go over here also. It looks like a mess right now Wiring does. I wait until the end to clean everything up once I've got the length and everything correct. In fact, you might be able to see down here what I did with the old harness. So that's what I kind of intend to do. Unfortunately, I can't roll this into this harness, but that's okay. I don't mind having a separate harness for the fuel injection for this. Under the dash here, I have this fuse which already hooks up to my ignition system, and this is switched ignition hot. So what I've done is I've kind of piggybacked onto it. They say not to do stuff like this, but this is just the ignition hot source, so I'm not as concerned. But you see right off this connector that is fused. I put a 7.5 amp fuse in this. This will be the power going into the ignition hot. I was already running a coolant temperature gauge on the car, and that was plugged into this part of the intake, which is the crossover that goes in between the two. I still want to have my coolant temperature registering on the dash, so I still want to have my temperature gauge. So what I've done is I purchased a new thermostat housing and installed my old temperature gauge sender unit here on this side of the thermostat. So what if I don't see temperature until after my thermostat starts opening up, which I don't mind that. I'll know if my thermostat's opening and closing the way this is set up, but the computer needs the engine temperature all the time. So this is more important that the computer gets its temperature from here. So I just moved my gauge up to here on that side of the thermostat. In addition to knowing coolant temperature, the all-important wideband O2 sensor is extremely important in this whole thing, because this is basically, when it's in closed loop, going to allow the computer to learn and calibrate a fuel mixture based on that. I'm already running a wideband on this so that I have my air fuel gauge on the dash. What I've done to future-proof everything is underneath here, right about here, is another bung that I can screw the O2 sensor into. So I've already welded in a bung onto my exhaust so that I could do that. You, however, Holley provides you with this as an alternative to doing any welding on your exhaust. You can get an O2 sensor bung and drill and weld it in if you're capable of doing that, but you don't have to. All you need is to drill a hole in the exhaust, I don't know, maybe like a 3/4 size. It says in the instructions exactly which size hole to drill. Then you can install this and clamp it onto the pipe, and this should work. Now, important note about this is this needs to be placed on top of the pipe. So in other words, it can't be placed down in the bottom like this, because moisture and things will collect in there. So it's got to be up high, number one. And also, the closer to the engine, the better, because this thing works when it gets hot. The faster this can warm up, the better, and it'll go into closed loop a lot quicker. So try to get close to the engine and keep this away from moisture by mounting it up top. Normally you would have this fuel pump relay and everything hooked up inside of your main harness. I cut mine out, and I'm sure Holley wasn't happy about that. I also removed the yellow coil negative wire from that harness because I'm not using it in my application. Do you remember when I said that you should hook directly to the battery and not some other power junction? This is the main power junction on the car as I built it. So that's the main battery cable coming in, that's also the feed from the alternator coming in, and also feeds for the fuse boxes and everything I have inside of the dash. This is like a raging river as far as electricity is concerned. The battery is like a nice, serene, calm lake, and the computer inside the Sniper EFI wants to live in that nice, serene, calm lake when it gets its power. It doesn't want to be stuck in the middle of the raging river. So avoid connecting up to something like this. Connect directly to the battery. And we're back, viewers. I have installed the engine and transmission so everything is in its proper place so that I know where my wires are going to run. I had to modify my coolant temperature sensor for my gauge, the wiring to that, to make that a little bit longer to accommodate the new location that I showed you earlier. Now I'm going to remove the engine removing plate and install the Super Sniper on the intake with its new gasket so that, well, we know where everything's going to be, and I'll be able to wire everything and clean everything up and make it all pretty before it's all done. Nice. Super encouraged that this is coming off without incident. I don't have to do anything except for sadly say goodbye to my carburetor gasket. Goodbye, carburetor. It's like the last remnant of the carburetor. I loved my carburetor. I really did. Time to move on. Here's the gasket that came in the kit. It looks symmetrical, so I don't think it would be that difficult. Yeah, it just drops right on there. Back side of the unit, front side of the unit. You can make fuel go in here either way. Given that I'm running forced induction, I cannot use the internal fuel pressure regulator on this. I have to block this off. So I'm going to take this port, move it over to the front on both sides. Oh my gosh, this is a bad day. So I need to order something like right now. That's -6, not -8, and I need -8. Well, if nothing else, I can switch it over. I was under the impression that these were -8 fittings up here. I was so wrong. You know, these aren't on there very snug. So if you've got one of these, I would check these fittings. Make sure that they are secure before you fire it up. And you really should check the fuel pressure straight away. Or just check to see if the system holds pressure right off before you try and start it up. That way you don't run the risk of having fuel spraying everywhere. These don't feel like they need a lot of torque. There's an O-ring there. You just, I think, need to compress that a little bit. Well, I did have one of those fittings, and the part number for this is actually in the instructions. For my horsepower rating, I should be running -6 for my fuel system. I already ran -8. I'm not going back. So it's just as easily to swap out. It's just as easy to swap out these fittings here, which are 9/16 to -8. So 9/16 O-ring. Once again, part number in the instructions, which I just ordered one overnight. All right. We can still sort out a bunch of other stuff though. All right, back on here. So my fuel inlets and outlets are going to be here. In my unboxing video, I showed that this threaded rod for the carburetor, at least on mine, was not the correct size, and I had to get another one. So be aware of that. This is a smaller one. I don't know the size off the top of my head just looking at it. Additionally, in that unboxing video, I showed that the linkage that I was using for my carburetor is never going to work on this. And there's just isn't any room. So what I've done is I've made extensions to extend this out like this, which gives me plenty of clearance. I should be okay with that. There is a bracket that is available that I found, and there was only one that I found specifically for the Sniper EFI. I'll put a link to that in the description, but it's like 75 bucks. I got some angle stock from the hardware store and made my own brackets if they work out. Between that and the fasteners I bought, which were really nice fasteners, I think I got about 15 bucks in it. These are my bracket extensions, freshly painted. Like I said, I'll watch that unboxing video because I put in there the angle stock that I used and everything else, but I'm just going to use these to basically extend out throttle linkage. So basically, I just got a set of bolts, nuts and bolts. Throttle linkage moves just fine. So no interference with this setup. It's not going anywhere. It's sturdy. I'm not going to run a return spring because this feels good to me. That feels better than ever. Except for that. A few things have happened since I last saw you. Mainly, I fixed the throttle cable. What happened is the end inside on the gas pedal, the accelerator pedal, broke off and the cable just pulled right through. So I fixed it with a spot weld. I'll throw up a picture of that right now. But these cheap throttle cables, well, they're just that cheap. But throttle works fine now. I've checked. It has a full range of motion, which is important. You want to make sure that at wide open throttle, it actually is at wide open throttle, and you want to make sure that the throttle can close. I decided not to run a throttle return spring because, well, honestly, I don't think I need it. I think the return springs on the unit seem to work okay. I made a discovery, though, that if you over-tighten the fasteners, and I'm not saying it, well, maybe I did over-tighten them, but if you really tighten these fasteners, it actually makes that squeaking noise during throttle operation even louder. And I suspect what that's doing is that's warping the case a little bit, just enough to where that throttle shaft is getting squeaky. So just be aware that if you really tighten that down to the manifold, which you don't really need to, that you might, either cause it to be noisy or cause it to wear out. I don't know. I just noticed that in mine, so I'm passing that along. I've also put the air conditioning compressor on here because I forgot about my AC line that ran really close to the throttle linkage. And it is closer than close to the throttle linkage, but it clears. Everything clears. Nothing hits. Nothing is causing any issues there, so I'm happy to see that. I've also installed the belt, and I've got sort of an idea of where wires and things are getting routed here in the engine compartment, which is what I'm going to tackle next. I also installed the O2 sensor in my exhaust, and I can show you that right now. Here's the new guy. As previously stated, I've welded a bung on this before, so I anticipated this day, but now I got two sensors. This is pre-cat and this is post-cat. That's a joke because I'm not running a catalytic converter on this. But this one in the back here is for my gauge. The one in the front here is for the fuel injection system. I've also made this fuel supply line coming in. I've chosen to just use a 90-degree going in here. I'm gonna probably zip tie that down. And then the other fuel line will come in like this once I get this new fitting to attach, and that will go over to the fuel pressure regulator. Your fuel pressure regulator is on the return side, so it's after the fuel passes through the fuel injection unit is where you want to put your fuel pressure regulator. If you don't have a boosted application like I do, don't worry about it. You got a fuel pressure regulator built into the unit. Hook everything up back here and don't worry about it. But on boosted applications, you need a boost regulated fuel pressure regulator, which I will be installing. And that's why I'm running an external regulator instead of using the one that's in the unit. Now my focus is going to be on tidying up the engine compartment, the wiring connections and those types of things. Once I've done that, I'm going to do what I can to finish off the fuel system, and then we'll move inside the car and complete those electrical connections there. All right, so I'm just going to spend some time trying to sort out wires and vacuum lines and get things tidied up and connected up. I don't want to permanently connect anything while I'm setting this stuff up, so I can just easily connect and disconnect. Now onto the harness, which I'm only using one wire of for now, which is the tachometer output. I'm going to route everything back to here with the appearance that you know, it's all one harness and it's worth more than just this wire. But on these wires that are sticking out on the ends, I'm going to cap them off with shrink tube and seal them up so that they can't come into contact with any metal and short anything out. And to start with, I'm going to cut them all the same length. Make it appear as all one harness instead of just all this for just one wire. Dramatic reveal of the capped ends of the wires. Oh. Watch as your wires magically disappear inside the tube. Where'd they go? They're all gone. It's just a black thing now. Today on Eric the Car Guy, tubes. These are intake vacuum sources on the back. You got a small one and a big one. My big one is going to my vacuum supply for basically the HVAC. I have a sequestered vacuum tank underneath the fender here that actually goes to, because running boost, I might not always have the vacuum I need to do stuff. Please admire the finished installation of my wiring. I'm quite proud of it. This is the boost regulated fuel pressure regulator that I got from Aeromotive that I will be running on this application. It's good for both carburetors and fuel injection. That's the reason why I got it. All you have to do is change out the spring inside of here. I've got videos about mishaps with that side of it. Went to the hardware store and got some of these fittings and built myself basically a way to read the gauge. I can adjust the pressure here and I can see the pressure that I'm getting up here on the gauge. I did a video about these fuel pressure gauges that I'll put a link to in the description that goes into detail about these, but this is my basic setup that I'm about to reinstall. Here are the fittings I use to accomplish that. And my mounting location is right down in here. It doesn't matter if you're running a separate fuel pressure regulator or using the regulator on the Sniper EFI. Both of those are on the return side. So if you're running an external regulator, the return runs to the fuel pressure regulator. And if you're running the regulator internal inside of the Sniper EFI, that is the return side of your system. The line going to the input for the boost regulated fuel pressure regulator needs to go above the carburetor head. It just needs to register boost. It doesn't need to register intake vacuum. I took the opportunity to install the ignition wires minus the distributor. I just put the cap and the wires in place. I'm going to connect the fuel lines up. I got my part, so I'll be able to connect my fuel lines, finish that up, and then I'm going to install the down pipe for the exhaust over there and the rest of the exhaust. And then we can push it back off the lift and take care of everything inside and finish up the wiring. It's starting to feel real. Old air fuel sensor, and this one, maybe one of these. Yeah, let's do one of those. Now that everything is connected under the hood and the exhaust is hooked up, I'm very excited about that. I'm going to go and connect those wires that I showed you towards the beginning. So I'm running power and ground from the battery. I am running a tack signal from the CD box in the back here, and then I'm getting the tack out from the CD box to go up into the dash. And I believe there's one more in there. Oh, the ignition hot. So the ignition bypass, in other words, is also what needs to get hooked up. So really, that's the bare minimum you need to run this. And then there's all the other components that you could hook up optionally, such as like nitrous on some systems, and also cooling fan operation, AC shutdown relay. All of that's covered in the instructions linked in the description. Here's a pro tip. When running wires, I usually run them a little bit long and get everything in place first, and then I'll cut them to fit. For instance, I'm basically going to make this purple wire take the place of this yellow wire. So I've got it cut long, so all I've got to do is sort of match up about where I want it to be, and I can snip it and I'll have the perfect length wire. Something you might consider, and I've learned this through difficult experience, is that you kind of don't want to make things permanent until you're sure that it works. So I've just gone in and twisted some wires together and zip tied some other wires together so that everything is connected, but I'm going to verify that everything works before I do finally commit and wire everything up and hide everything up under the dash. And these are you can find these at like the hardware store. Pro battery cables are the way to go for stuff like this. Pro battery cables. I got other places to put stuff, like the computer power. Going into a fuse, which I harvested from the harness, 30 amp. So everything going down there is going to be fused. I could get a little snazzy with this and like maybe hook that up in there. Thought about it, but not right now. So close. I'm gonna get this oil in here, which takes a minute because it's running like honey at the moment. And then I will prime the oil system and get that ready. Like I said, I had the engine apart, replaced some lifters, so I want to make sure that oil's all through the engine. Then we will do a fuel system pressure test, or pressure check. So I'll bring the system up to pressure, look for leaks. And then we'll go and look at the startup and do the setup for this engine. And we'll see if it fires up. Right? Time to pre-oil. All it takes on a Ford is a 1/4 inch socket, and I've got it taped to the extension so that I don't lose it. Now if we want to get really tricky, turn the ignition on and look at the oil pressure gauge to make sure we got pressure. All right, here we go. It's like the engine's running, but it's not running. And by the way, the Ford is a reverse rotation, so reverse your drill when you do it. Now that the oil is primed in the engine, I'm going to turn on the fuel pump and check all the parts that I just installed on the fuel system for any leaks. So far, so good. I will turn the fuel pump on again and dial in fuel pressure where I want it, which is going to be 58 psi. Well, the fuel pump is very happy about this. That's 58. Fuel pump sounds a little different now. I'm just gonna cycle it and see if it comes back up again. Yep. I've checked the fuel system for any leaks. I've looked the car over and all the stuff that I've did. So far, everything looks good. Now it's time to set up the Sniper EFI. This is outlined in the instructions in the PDF that is linked in the description, but I'm just gonna run through the basic setup now from what I remember from reading the instructions. So the ignition goes on. This is good. This is really good that it's showing this. Key on, first thing I hit is Wizards. And the first thing we're going to do is select our unit, which is the 4-injector 4150 Super Sniper. Next, number of cylinders, 8. Engine displacement is 363. Target idle speed, I'm going to go for like a 750. I think is a good idle. I'm gonna go with a street strip cam, or actually no, I'm gonna go with stock mild. You look at your cams, it has to do with vacuum, like how much vacuum your engine produces. I know my engine could produce about 18, 20 inches of vacuum, which is considered stock mild according to this setup. So that's my cam. I have a turbo. I have a CD box. This is the ignition type system, so if you hooked up to coil negative, once again, this is outlined in the instructions. Target air fuel at 0 boost. So this is at 0 boost. I'm very happy with 12.2, so I'm gonna stick with that. So per 7 psi, I want to richen things up as it gets more boost. Let's just see how far it goes. 11.7, that's safe. 21 psi, I'll never get there. I'll be most likely in here. So 11.7 seems reasonable to me. Press the start button, send the calibration to the ECU. So start. It's talking to the ECU right now. Cycle the ignition to complete the operation. So turn this off. I just heard it doing something out under the hood. Theoretically, we should be able to start it up now. All right, I've cycled the key, and real quick, I'm gonna do a check. One of the things they check for, I'm gonna go for vitals. Yeah, let's go for that. Okay, so my RPM signal should say stall, just like this, until I start cranking. So that's what you wanna see. So then it knows it's hooked up to the ignition system. So it's an open loop. Learn status is no learn, but actually when I started it should be doing something else, but I should be able to see a tach signal, all this stuff. Here goes. Maybe a timing issue? I am seeing an RPM signal and stuff, so, and should be seeing coolant temperature sensor also. Battery's low. That's a timing issue. Let's try this again. I believe I have the, I had the timing 180 degrees out. Any leaks? Check the timing. Initially, I set the timing to 16 degrees. I'll worry about fine tuning later. All right, I've got another tip for you. I just finished connecting all the wires together from the bulkhead coming through into the car, and I'm about to wrap the conduit around. But before I do, I wanted to show you something. When I connected all these wires, so this group of wires that I'm crimping together, and I like crimp connections, especially these that have the shrink tube around the outside. I'll link them in the description so you can check them out for yourself. But the tip I'm trying to convey here is that when you do these connections, stagger them. Don't put them all in one spot. That way you don't have like a pregnant spot in the harness. So you stagger them out, and it'll spread that bulk out over a larger area. And here's the result of staggering those connections. No bulky spots in the conduit or the harness. I think it looks pretty good. So here's the finished engine compartment. And I am so in love. I really dig this, and I love the throttle response that I'm hearing so far. I can't wait to take it out and drive it. I'm also looking forward to when I install the Hyperspark system, and I have timing control as well as all these other controls. That's going to be super cool. Looking forward to that. And yes, I'll make a video. This is where I chose to mount my display. I have these magnet things. I use this for my phone, so I made this mount here, and I can just stick it there and put it in the glove compartment when I'm not using it. I do notice that the air fuel readings on here are different than the air fuel readings on my meter here, and I wonder if that's because the Sniper EFI is hooked up to my battery and this is hooked up to my power distribution. So I don't know if there's enough of a voltage drop to actually change readings, but I suppose it's possible. But this is where things end up, and this is where I hid my stylus. Installation of the Holley Super Sniper EFI. I hope the information in this video helped you, gave you some tips, gave you some tricks. If you're installing one of these, or if you're considering purchasing one, you gotta get an idea of what you're in for. Now, I didn't go over the installation of that fuel pump relay and all that, but if you can get this far, I think you can get that far. It's just like another power connection and a few other things that you need to connect. Holley was a little butthurt when I told him I cut that part out of the harness, but as you can see, it fires up and runs just fine. So you know the bare minimum of what you need to get the Holley Super Sniper EFI to work out. Personally, I like the fact that it starts up really well. I also like the throttle response, and let's face it, it's way better than my Carburetor was for a street car. That is hands down. All right, there, I said it. I'll put links in the description to the PDF of the instructions, along with additional videos and information if you have questions about any of this stuff. I will also put a link in the description to EricTheCarGuy.com, which is where I ask you go if you have automotive questions. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do those kinds of things that help make a living. Super appreciate that. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.